All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show.
All right, you guys, on the line, I've got the great Matt Taibbi from Racket News, and he's got some blockbusters for us here. Welcome back, Matt. How you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Very happy to have you here. The censorship files, we will not be intimidated from continuing our mission. That's the state talking. I love it. We will not be intimidated. That's so funny. They're so brave. And then more importantly, Twitter files, CIA. And there's Jane Harmon, our friend, the old burnt Mossad spy. And this one is a joint racket with you and Public. That's Michael Schellenberger and friends over there. And you have, I guess, what sort of a short summary of it at Racket called the Overlooked Twitter Files Scandal. One more big one, at least here. How the intelligence community wore down the platform. So take us through it here.
Yeah, so the Twitter file story, just to back up on the mechanics of how that whole thing happened, when we got in the first week of doing that story, we had basically like a portal that allowed us to search universally in any direction for like an 8-month period of Slack chats, and that's where we got a gigantic amount of material. And then after that, we had a number of different regimes of searches where we had people looking up different things, but once we settled on the FBI thing, we were mostly looking for that, this question of like government censorship. So we started to get all this stuff, and it's really 150, 160,000 emails maybe, and there's a lot of stuff in there, including attachments that we didn't read, and there's no way any one person could even by now have gone through all of it. So we missed some things, and one of the stories that we didn't look at involved this, a thing that was already known to the public, which is that Twitter got hacked in 2020. Barack Obama's account was compromised, so was Joe Biden's and Elon Musk's. And after that, Twitter brought in a famed hacker and cybersecurity expert named Peter Mudge Zatko to conduct a security review of the platform. And what Schellenberger found, we ignored that story for a couple of reasons, or we didn't think it was newsworthy for a couple of reasons. One is that it had, some people thought that his conclusions about security failures at Twitter might have been beneficial to Elon Musk. So we didn't want to be accused of doing something that was like in favor of Elon. But when Michael went back through and looked at all this material, he finds emails, one of which says that this guy got fired by Twitter for having a relationship with the security agencies while he was accessing all of Twitter's internal documentation and reviewing all of its security procedures. I'll just read you the one smoking gun email that he found. Without the knowledge or support of the management or the board, Twitter learned that Zatko had engaged with members of the U.S. intelligence agencies and sought to enter a formal agreement that would allow him to work with them and provide information to them. So this now, it's hard to explain. This led us down this long rabbit hole that involves pressure that was applied to the company to let the intelligence services and the enforcement agencies be involved in the content moderation process. And this was a kind of a key moment in that progression, and we just didn't know about it until we started diving into it. So that's kind of the starting point of the whole thing.
I see. So, yeah, from what I gleaned from this thing, you're saying that because this Aletha, that's not.
Alethea, yeah. Mhm.
No, that's not this guy's company, but that's a contractor that he hired, but they're sort of a cutout for CIA. Is that right?
Yeah, so the basic plot is Twitter gets hacked. There's an outcry that there's security issues at the company. This guy, who used to work for DARPA, by the way, is brought in as a consultant. He presses the company to hire a firm called Alethea, which was started with, among other things, $10 million in seed capital from In-Q-Tel, which is the venture capital arm of the CIA. They issue a whole bunch of recommendations about how basically Twitter can't handle security itself and needs to bring in quote unquote outside partners. And when Twitter doesn't go for it, the guy turns whistleblower and places additional pressure on the company to let outside agencies, into their internal processes. There's like there are Senate hearings, and a whistleblower complaint and other stuff. But if you look at all those pieces of information together, it looks like kind of a suspicious timeline, and we just missed that angle.
Yeah. So tell us about Nina Jankowicz's role in this.
Well, that's a little bit controversial. Here's what we found is that this company Alethea, now they did a pair of audits that were ordered by this Mudge guy, and they suggested a whole range of crazy content moderation / censorship ideas, including like things like pre-platforming and putting people in artificial voids and stuff like that. And then there was another audit where they reviewed Twitter's alleged role in January 6th. Now, the work order that we found for that second audit listed Nina Jankowicz as the technical research director of the project and said that she was making $375 an hour doing that. She denies that that she did any work for the company with Twitter, but the work order is what it is. We published it, and it's a little weird because the audit that they conducted basically concluded that Twitter had no role in January 6th. They couldn't find any evidence of planning or violent speech or anything like that. So the whole premise of why you would need to have the government involved in a platform like Twitter is kind of undermined by their own report, which is interesting.
Yeah. And so to zoom out a bit here, I mean, the point is that to some degree, the CIA and its contractors just completely took over what? Like the algorithm for what gets suppressed or what doesn't, or what?
Well, it's, yeah, I apologize. I mean, it's kind of a weedsy story, right? And because we've been subsumed in it for a couple of years, it jumped out at us probably more than it would for somebody who isn't living it. But basically, the company for years had been under pressure to let outside agencies be part of their decision making about content and how to build algorithms and for restricting this and that. You know, we even found a letter where the FBI passed on a note from their friends at the fort, meaning Fort Meade, basically saying, we know you're not providing data to the IC. Would you like to reconsider? Twitter says no. And then it's a few months later that this hack happens, and then this guy comes in. And so it's all part of this big narrative where Twitter was trying to hold out and be an independent company and not have to be partnering with the FBI, the CIA, or the NSA on content. And at the end of this process, they got so much bad press that they just basically ended up partnering with these folks and creating just this very complicated system where Homeland Security, FBI, and apparently some other agencies were intimately involved in their decision making.
Mm-hmm. So this really was, though, a major turning point in the thing that you guys had overlooked. But in other words, I don't know. Like in the scheme of things, this really made a difference. The one time they hired this contractor, that was the camel's nose in the under the flap of the tent there.
Yeah, I think so because first of all, the hack was significant. Twitter gets hacked. The president of the United States account gets hacked. As one person I talked to, a former military intelligence guy, said, the president's account gets hacked, we're at least going to drive by the building, and so did they insert this person in to clean things up? Well, it's not exactly clear. We don't have full proof of that, but we do have chatter in the company saying that he was let go because of this. He didn't respond to our queries about that, but clearly this incident coupled with this avalanche of negative press about security failures, and it led to them eventually sort of saying uncle and letting in the FBI and other agencies and creating a formal system of content flagging that involved the FBI and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. But we just thought that this moment where this person who was basically kind of in charge of security at the company for a brief period of time, the revelation that he was probably working for the intelligence agencies, or that he might have been, it seemed kind of significant to us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that sort of brings us, I guess, to the next article here, the censorship files, because, well, there's a couple more here. Man, you're really cranking out a lot of great stuff here. Point being that if I have it right, there was some sort of rollback as a consequence of your and your colleagues' great journalism on this issue, and because of the lawsuits about it by, I guess it was state attorneys general were suing over it and all of that. And so, there was pressure from some in Congress. So they had suspended some of this, and yet they're, like in the name of your co-author here, Undead FOIA, these are the undead censors here. They're not quite all the way gone yet. And it's an election year, and everybody knows that Trump is a Russian fascist agent, spy, and of course the New York Times already has stories about there's Russian disinformation projects afoot. I have a tab here somewhere like that. So, oh, there it is. Russia steps up covert sabotage campaigns. And that wasn't the online one. There's a different one about online. Anyway, point being, they got their pretext for protecting democracy by destroying the First Amendment here. So where are they at now, and where does that leave us for the rest of the election year here?
Yeah, so if you might have noticed in the last couple of months, there have been a spate of news stories basically suggesting that AI and deep fakes are creating a unique security threat for the coming election. The Senate Intelligence Committee is about to hold hearings on what to do about that. The ranking member, the majority leader for the Intelligence Committee, which Senator Mark Warner out of Virginia, actually let it slip a couple of weeks ago that in relation to that topic, the security agencies had begun working with the platforms again. As you said, because of that Supreme Court case, Murphy v. Missouri, they had kind of backed off. So the FBI and the DHS, they had stopped, at least they say they did, they stopped doing these censorship programs with Facebook, Twitter, Google, all these other companies. But in anticipation of winning that Supreme Court case, they've now started up again. And the reason, ostensibly, is because of a new concern about AI and deep fakes. I mean, it's just, they've thought up one reason after another going back 8 years now. Originally, it was like Russian bots, right? Then it was domestic violent extremists that needed to be stopped. Then it was, election denial. It's one thing after another. So
well, and enforcing their COVID and Ukraine narratives.
Exactly, all those things, right? So COVID was a big one, and now the thing du jour is AI and deepfakes, and the question is what programs are they going to install? And what we did is after the Twitter files, we had some trouble figuring out uh, where the funding was going for some of these anti-disinformation agencies that the government has, like the Global Engagement Center and the Foreign Intelligence Task Force and stuff like that. So we sent out hundreds of freedom of information requests to universities and other places, asking for documents about what it is that they're actually doing, and we started to get answers back, and we began publishing some of that stuff, and that's what these censorship file stories are about. And the reason they're significant is because some of them point to plans for 2024 to do more like aggressive content moderation programs. They're not terribly specific, but they're interesting.
Yeah. Hey, y'all, let me tell you about Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. Nobody trusts the U.S. dollar anymore. Foreign governments are stocking up on gold instead of $100 bills. One, they know they need to, and two, that means you need to too. Interest rates are up, but for some reason, not much for savings accounts. Park your money there and watch Uncle Joe Biden just counterfeit its value away. You can see how the Fed is afraid to raise rates to beat inflation for fear of popping the current bubbles, at least before the election. So more inflation it will continue to be. Gold is your shield against monetary and price inflation, just like it always has been. Now, Tim Fry and the guys over at Robertson Roberts are recommending gold over silver since the world's almost 200 governments are putting their own pressure on the price, which should help everyone else who makes similar calls on their own. Of course, Robertson Roberts can help you with platinum, palladium, and silver, as well as gold. Don't let the Fed and the war party inflate all your savings away. Look up Robertson Roberts at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. Hey, y'all, you should sign up for my Substack. It's scotthortonshow.substack.com. And if you do that, you'll get the interviews a day before everybody else. But not only that, they'll be free of commercials. How do you like that? Pretty good, huh? scotthortonshow.substack.com. Hey, y'all, libertasbella.com is where you get Scott Horton Show and Libertarian Institute shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, and stickers and things, including the great Top Lobsters designs as well. See, that way it says on your shirt why you're so smart. Libertas Bella, from the same great folks who bring you ammo.com for all your ammunition needs, too. That's libertasbella.com. Now, refresh my memory, but months back, wasn't it the case that you guys revealed that if you took sort of the laundry list of the top sort of, I guess you'd call them new right, pro-Trump influencers on social media, people like Charlie Kirk or, the whole group of them there, Posabik, those guys, that weren't they all just completely cranked down? Wasn't that one of y'all's stories that revealed that, right before the election, basically all of the best Trump boosters were not necessarily deplatformed. They wouldn't necessarily know they were kicked off, but they just had their engagement cranked all the way down, right?
Yeah, so the big program to do content moderation was this thing called the Election Integrity Partnership that was run out of Stanford, but it partnered with Homeland Security and the State Department, weirdly enough. And they put out a big report at the end of what they did is they were sending out masses of flags to companies like Twitter saying you might want to think about taking this down, basically. And their own top 10 list of offenders, they were all kind of pro-Trump conservative outlets like the Gateway Pundit and stuff like that. And that's by their own admission. We found, in this latest batch of stuff that, they were having discussions where they're talking about, maybe we shouldn't just ban accounts, but like whole sites, including Occupy Democrats and Gateway Pundit. And the reason that's interesting is because it speaks to the mindset of these folks. Like the old idea about censorship is you take down something that's incorrect. But their whole idea is that people can be incorrect or sites can be incorrect just generally. So let's just preemptively take down the whole thing. Like that's one of the ideas that we found in some of their correspondence.
Yeah. Well, they'll go as far as they can with it. That's for sure. And are they outright? Do you find anything where they're like outright just identifying the election of Trump as something that must be stopped? Wouldn't be surprising.
They don't go that far, but it's certainly kind of one of the between the lines things that you read in all this correspondence. We found a lot of stuff about discussions at, for instance, the Aspen Institute, where they had this crazy panel that was called the Commission on Information Disorder, that was like headed up by, of all people, Katie Couric, Prince Harry, and the former head of the Homeland Security Department, the CISA.
What the hell?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely crazy.
I didn't think you were about to say all those words in a row there, Taibbi.
Oh, yeah, I know. I mean, when we first saw this stuff in the Twitter files, there's like a page where it had a list of all the commissioners. When I saw Prince Harry and Katie Couric at the top of the page, I almost had a heart attack. I was like, it's so surreal, some of this stuff. But that's what it is. Anyway, this commission, some of their ideas were so crazy and so beyond the scope of just taking down material that they thought was incorrect, that even somebody who's about as partisan as you can get, which is the chess champion Garry Kasparov, he kind of quit the commission and sent them this vicious letter saying that this reminds me of home, using a disinformation committee to do things like try to force people to change their workplace diversity policies. That approach was a common practice in the USSR. So the interesting thing about this is that they view this idea of creating disinformation committees as a way to get their nose into almost any conceivable kind of political issue, whether it's hiring practices, taxation, conquering racism. Like they believe that disinformation is responsible for people voting incorrectly. So, or if you don't favor reparations, it's because you haven't been properly informed about the history of slavery. So they see that as part of their mandate. And the idea that this is mission creep and that the government should never be involved in this stuff, certainly, it's just totally absent from their thinking. And even me, I'm basically kind of a political liberal, but it's the unconstitutionality of this that jumps out when you read these files.
Yeah, it's funny too when Kasparov is comparing them to Soviet communists. He's not saying because of like what leftist revolutionaries they are, but because of what like horrifying bureaucratic totalitarians they are, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It has nothing to do with ideology. It's the authoritarian structure of how these things work that set him off. And I understand that. I mean, I was a student in the Soviet Union back in the day, and I lived in post-communist Russia for a long time. And the idea, for instance, of using psychiatric committees to change somebody's place in the workforce, right? You can give them a mental illness diagnosis for having the wrong ideas. You could use, they had this committee called the Rabkrin, which was like a workers and peasants committee, supposedly protecting workers' rights. But really what it was is, if you wanted to snitch out somebody that you worked with who you didn't like and take his job, you got the right position in the committee, mm-hmm. and you did it that way. And that's what set him off about this, is that you can use these disinformation committees to go after almost anybody. And that's what's so scary.
Yeah. So they don't have to be, kind of a leftist really at all. This is the perfect type job for a center left liberal Democratic voter, like a Hillary Clinton type,
Right. And this has been my frustration with this whole story is, when we first started doing the Twitter files, people were saying, "Oh, you're doing work for the right. You've gone over to conservatism and all this other stuff." And I said, just read these files. It has nothing to do with ideology. This is all about power and, using these new methodologies to basically hand over new forms of authority to the federal government that they are constitutionally barred from having, right? We can't, for instance, the State Department has no legal business being involved in speech in the United States or dealing with or regulating, say, election misinformation. Like, they're not supposed to be involved domestically at all, but they're working with these crazy committees at places like Stanford to review content. What is that all about? That's crazy. It doesn't matter whether you're right or left. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And that's why people just they misunderstand what this whole thing is about. It's about power, not ideology.
Mm-hmm. Well, and by and large, partisan arguments are about which truths people choose to emphasize rather than just outright lying about what the facts are. When people say, like, "Oh, your opinion is incontrovertibly wrong," or something, but it's an opinion based on all kinds of things that obviously no one can regulate that other than just free arguments, especially in the United States of America. If anybody ever heard of that, free speech, and we'll work it out in the free market of ideas and all that.
Yeah, I mean, and Scott, like the whole concept of how the free press is supposed to work in this country is like we don't assume that we're going to be right about stuff, and we certainly the news is fluid. Like, even something as kind of relatively I would say uncomplicated as journalistic truth, which is usually just a measure of what can we say without being sued, right? For being wrong. Even that is very, very difficult to determine. At the outset of crises like the pandemic, you can't just come in and say it didn't come from a lab. You don't know that, right? Like, you might think that, but you don't know that.
Yeah.
And it's bad enough for private companies to lay down rules about what you can and cannot say, but when you start getting, the FBI and the State Department involved in these issues, or even worse, the Pentagon funding some of these committees, then you're into this whole new world of just weirdness, which is exactly what the founders, I think, were trying to avoid when they designed the First Amendment. We don't want the government having a truth committee. That's something we arrive at by discussion, because you just never know, right? Like, that's the whole idea. And these people think completely the opposite, and that's what's nuts about them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even then, the presumption should be that they're the worst liars in America about everything, of course.
Yes.
They're not going to be the ones to get to the bottom. And even just since this censorship regime that you've so well described was created, what they do? They enforce the phony Russiagate narratives, and that everyone who knew better was one of them and deserved to be outright censored or shadow banned, et cetera, et cetera. And then on from there to, as you say, COVID, not just that it couldn't possibly have been from anywhere but a wet market, but also about, people arguing about the effectiveness of masks and mandates and lockdowns and vaccines and all of the rest of that, all the censorship behind that. And of course, every bit of the censorship was on the wrong side of all of those issues the whole time. It turns out, the lockdowns didn't do any good at all. The masks didn't do any good at all. All of that massive totalitarian social engineering didn't stop the virus one damn bit, and the vaccines had their problems and all of the rest of that. And then you move on to the laptop, which they obviously were lying if you're an honest person at the time. But still, they claim was Russian disinformation to crush the Republicans' October surprise in 2020 before the election there. And anyway, I'm rambling, but on every single one of them, they're liars. They're enforcing lies and trying to prevent people from telling the truth. And then they just call it the opposite of that. But it's pretty obvious.
Right. I mean, if what people don't understand about this is that if you put the government in charge of deciding what is and is not a fact, then you're just giving them a monopoly on lying. And these are people, as you say, that have a record of putting out the most destructive lies that you can have. I mean, the biggest lies are always official, right? You go back to from the Gulf of Tonkin to WMDs to the missile gap to any one of a dozen other things to Russiagate is another one that it's just one sort of wrong story after another that was cranked out to the public, and you want to put those folks in charge of deciding what is and is not a fact. That's what we have a free press for. The press is there to kind of consider everything and say, no, bullshit, this isn't true, right?
Or at least some of the time. I mean, mostly they're just the handmaiden of the state, but there ought to be some discrepancies available,
Yeah, exactly. And if you turn off even that limited valve, right, then you have a real problem. And that's why we're trying to pressure these folks into not doing this, because bad outcomes will absolutely ensue.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's a fact that whenever I get an email says racket on it, I stop whatever I'm doing and read that thing, because you do such great work all the time, Matt. So really appreciate you.
All right. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, yeah. Talk soon. All right, you guys. That's Matt Taibbi. He's at Substack. And that is, oh, sorry, I was looking at a public one. It's just racket.news. It's the website, actually. Racket.news.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.